The first time I stepped inside the Mall of America as an employee, the building felt alive. Its lights glared down like unblinking eyes, far too bright for the early hour. Even before the shoppers arrived, the place had an energy that pressed down on me, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. The mall wasn't just enormous. It was overwhelming, stretching endlessly with polished floors that reflected distorted shapes whenever I passed. I thought working here would be just another job, simple shifts and long walks across wide corridors. But I was wrong. From the very first day, the mall seemed eager to show me it wasn't the harmless playground of families and tourists I had always believed. During training, I noticed how every corner had its own hum, a sound beneath the usual mechanical buzz. It was faint, almost like breathing, and it followed me no matter where I went. The food court smelled of burnt oil and sugar, yet beneath that, I caught something metallic, like rust or dried blood, lingering even though nothing in sight explained it. The escalators groaned as though they disliked being used, and the mannequins in clothing shops stood too stiffly, too perfectly, with faces that seemed a heartbeat away from blinking. I was assigned simple duties, stock checking, assisting customers, learning the layout, but it was impossible to ignore the unsettling details. The mall had murals painted along certain walls, colorful scenes meant to appear welcoming. Yet the painted figures all wore the same forced smile. Their eyes were too sharp, too aware, as if watching me rather than inviting me. I caught myself staring at them too long, feeling as though they might tilt their heads if I blinked. The other staff behaved normally enough on the surface, laughing, chatting, explaining rules, but now and then their smiles slipped into something rehearsed, as though they knew more about the place than they wanted to share. I overheard one worker muttering that the mall never truly closed, even when the shutters rolled down and the last customer left. I thought it was a joke, a passing remark, yet the unease it gave me stayed lodged in my chest like a splinter. By midday I felt drained, though I had done little beyond walking. The endless corridors tricked my sense of direction, repeating like mirrored loops. A shop I passed once reappeared again, only the display in the window had shifted slightly, as if it had been rearranged in the few minutes I had been gone. The air itself felt thick, heavy with something unseen, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced someone was following me, though each time the space was empty. It was when I paused by the central atrium that I realized how wrong the place felt. The skylights above should have spilled natural daylight into the halls, yet the beams looked pale and colorless, not sunlight but some poor imitation. Shadows bent in unnatural directions, stretching longer than they should, curling against corners like living things trying to escape the light. When my first shift ended, I thought I would feel relief. Instead, I felt the mall holding me in its grip, reluctant to let me leave. My chest tightened as I stepped towards the exit, and for a fleeting moment I swore the automatic doors hesitated, as though considering whether to open. When they finally did, a rush of cool air hit me, but it wasn't enough to shake the sense that the building was still watching, still smiling in its own way, waiting for me to return. I told myself it was nerves, the strangeness of a new job, the vastness of a space too big to feel comfortable in. But deep inside, I knew it was more. Something lingered within those walls, something patient, something hidden, and I was already caught in its gaze. The first day was over, yet the mall had only just begun to show me its face. The second day should have been easier. I told myself I was simply adjusting, that the vast corridors and towering ceilings were only overwhelming because I wasn't used to them. Yet when night fell and the shutters rolled down, the unease returned with greater weight. There was something unnatural about being inside the mall once the shoppers were gone. The chatter, the laughter, the constant flow of bodies. All of it vanished, leaving behind a silence that did not feel empty but crowded. The air hummed with stillness, as though hundreds of unseen eyes waited just beyond the darkened shops. I was scheduled to help with closing duties, tidying displays and checking stock before the next morning. The overhead lights dimmed in stages, casting longer shadows that moved with every flicker. The cleaning staff moved through their tasks quickly, rarely speaking, their faces downturned. Even the security guards seemed reluctant to linger, walking in pairs instead of alone, their radios crackling with static more often than with words. It was during one of these moments, when I was alone in a wide corridor near the department stores, that I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing off the polished tiles. I froze, expecting to see another worker rounding the corner. But no one came. The sound continued, measured and steady, until it seemed to be only a few paces behind me. I turned, heart thudding, and found the corridor stretching out in silence. Every shuttered shop staring back like a row of blind eyes. I told myself it was the acoustics. A place this big could bounce sound in strange ways. I forced myself to keep walking, but the noise returned. This time the rhythm shifted, 2 steps, then a pause, then another 2, as though someone were mimicking me, waiting for me to move first. The hairs on my arms prickled. I walked faster, resisting the urge to run. The sound kept pace. By the time I reached the staff break room, I was sweating, my hands trembling as I pretended to rummage through my bag. A pair of cleaners passed by without a glance, and I almost asked them if they had heard the same thing. But their faces were pale and drawn, their shoulders stiff as though carrying a weight too heavy to share. Something told me they already knew, and it was better not to speak. The night dragged on, every task stretched by the oppressive silence. Whenever I looked into the darkened glass of shop windows, I saw movement that did not belong to me. Shapes lingered just out of sight, disappearing when I tried to focus. Mannequins seemed closer to the edge of the displays, their glass eyes angled differently than before, watching me from behind smeared reflections. Near closing, a security guard approached, his face tense. He told me in a low voice to stick with the group as we locked up. When I asked why, he only muttered that the mall had long corridors for a reason. His words hung in the air like smoke, and he walked away without looking back. When the final locks clicked into place and the last lights went dark, I stepped outside with the others, but my mind was still inside. Those footsteps had followed me long before the end of my shift, and even now, as I lay in bed replaying the sound, I realized something that chilled me more than the empty mall. The steps had never grown louder or fainter. They had remained at the exact same distance, as if whoever walked with me already knew exactly where I was meant to go. By the 3rd day, my nerves were already frayed. I told myself I was imagining too much, that the footsteps, the shifting shadows, the mannequin's watchful eyes were nothing more than tricks of fatigue. Yet the mall was relentless, peeling away my excuses layer by layer. That day, I was assigned to assist one of the security staff with basic monitoring, a task that should have been dull. Instead, it opened a door I wished had stayed shut. The security office was a cramped room tucked away behind service corridors, its air stale and humming with the constant buzz of monitors. Wall after wall of screens flickered with grainy feeds, every angle of the mall under constant watch. From the atrium to the service hallways, every corner seemed covered. At first, I found reassurance in the surveillance, thinking it might prove my unease was nothing but paranoia. The guard, a man with sunken eyes and a clipped way of speaking, showed me how the system worked. Most cameras rotated on a cycle, panning across their assigned areas. Others were fixed, staring into certain corners without movement. I leaned closer, scanning the images, expecting to see empty halls. Instead, I saw something I could not understand. In one corridor, the camera showed a lone figure standing perfectly still. At first I thought it was a worker, but the image was too grainy to tell. The guard tapped a key, switching to another angle, and the figure was gone. He switched back, still gone. His face tightened, and he quickly moved to another feed as though nothing had happened. I asked him if that was normal. He gave me a thin smile that never touched his eyes and said the cameras sometimes glitched. Yet the look on his face betrayed him. He knew it was no error. Later, when he stepped out to take a call, I kept watching the monitors. That was when I noticed something stranger still. On one screen, I saw myself walking past a shop window. My reflection followed, distorted by the glass. Yet in the feed, my reflection did not mimic me perfectly. It lagged, moving half a second later, its head tilting differently, its arms swinging out of rhythm. I leaned in, my pulse hammering, but the footage flickered, and the anomaly vanished. I scrolled through other feeds, my hands trembling, and again I caught glimpses of things that should not have been there. A shadow moving against the direction of the lights. A mannequin shifting its stance between one frame and the next. An empty hallway showing a dark stain spreading slowly across the tiles, then disappearing as if it had never existed. When the guard returned, he found me staring, frozen. He didn't scold me, didn't even ask what I had seen. Instead, he placed a heavy hand on my shoulder and said in a voice too calm to be natural, "Don't watch too closely. The cameras don't always tell the truth. And the less you know about what they hide, the better." That night, the screens haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself from above, moving on looped footage, my reflection lagging behind, my shadow stepping out of sync. It was as if the mall had split me into pieces, scattering parts of me across its endless corridors. The thought clawed at me until I could no longer sleep. Because if the cameras lied, then how could I be certain I was ever seeing the truth at all? By the fourth day, I avoided the security office. I didn't want to see those screens again, didn't want to witness the distortions that hinted at a reality beneath the surface of the mall. But avoidance brought me no comfort. The mall had other ways of reminding me that it was watching. That day I was assigned to help with visual displays, which meant walking into shops after hours and assisting with mannequins. I had always disliked mannequins, those hollow smiles and blank, painted eyes. But now, inside the quiet of a closed store, I realized my dislike had been too soft a word. It was fear, sharp and unrelenting, and it only deepened as the night stretched on. The mannequins stood in clusters, their limbs locked in frozen gestures, as though caught mid-performance. Their skin-colored plastic gleamed under dimmed lights, their stillness unnatural in a way that unsettled me more than if they had been moving. My task was simple: change a few outfits, adjust a display. Yet every time I stepped away from one group, I felt the pull of unseen eyes. The kind of stare that pricks the back of your neck until you're forced to look. I tried to work quickly, keeping my gaze fixed on the clothes in my hands. But no matter where I turned, there was always the impression that one mannequin had shifted, that its arm was not angled quite the same as before, that its head tilted a fraction closer towards me. I told myself I was imagining it, but the evidence stacked against me in quiet, unbearable increments. A mannequin that had been facing the window was now angled towards the center of the shop. Another that had been posed with its hand resting at its side seemed to have fingers curled inward, as though clenching. It wasn't just sight, it was sound. The faint creak of plastic joints under pressure, soft as a sigh. A scrape across the tiled floor, too slow to be a mistake of hearing. When I froze, straining my ears, all fell silent again, the mannequins innocent in their poses. But when I resumed, the noises returned, like a predator stalking me through a forest of hollow bodies. The worst moment came as I crouched to adjust a pair of shoes. The glass window in front of me reflected the mannequins behind. For a moment, I thought I had miscounted them. In the reflection, there was one more figure than in reality. Taller, thinner, its head bent low as though straining to listen. I spun around, my breath trapped in my throat, and saw nothing but the same familiar cluster. Yet when I looked back into the glass, the extra figure was gone. By then, my hands shook so violently I could hardly fasten a button. I abandoned the task, retreating into the corridor where the shop lights spilled across the polished tiles. But the safety I expected did not arrive. The reflections in the windows still shifted as I passed, and at the edge of my vision, shadows lingered between the mannequins, pooling where no shadow should have reached. That night, as I finally left the mall, I caught one last glimpse that anchored itself in my mind. From across the atrium, high on a balcony, a line of mannequins stood in neat formation, part of a promotional display. But their heads, every single one of them, were angled downwards, not towards the open space below, but directly at me, as though I were the centerpiece of their silent theater. I hurried out into the night air, but their hollow eyes followed, etched into me like burn marks I could never wash away. And I understood, with an awful clarity, that the mannequins were not lifeless props. They were listeners, watchers, sentinels of whatever the mall was keeping hidden. And they knew my name. By the 5th day, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. My nights were restless, broken by dreams where mannequins leaned too close and footsteps paced the edges of my bed. I told myself the daylight shift would be easier, that crowds of shoppers would blunt the strangeness. Yet in truth, the presence of people only deepened it, for the mall seemed to hold them in its grip as much as it did me. Families laughed, children ran between fountains, but every sound echoed oddly, stretched thin as though the walls were feeding upon it. The mall was always hungry. During my break, I lingered in the staff corridors where customers were never allowed. These were narrow, industrial spaces lined with gray doors and humming pipes, far less glamorous than the public areas. It was here I began to notice something disturbing. Some staff members never left. At first, I thought it was dedication, employees working overtime, handling late-night stock checks or maintenance. But when I saw the same faces every shift, at every hour, unease took root. One man in a maintenance uniform stood silently by the vending machine for hours, never eating, never drinking. A woman in retail clothing moved endlessly between storerooms, yet her eyes never blinked when I passed. I caught sight of a cleaner polishing the same patch of floor long past midnight, his hand moving in slow, mechanical circles, his face expressionless. When I returned the next morning, he was still there, polishing the same square of tile as though time meant nothing to him. I asked another colleague if these people ever went home. She gave me a quick smile, too quick, and muttered that the mall had permanent staff. Her tone was rehearsed, clipped, the kind of answer designed to shut questions down. But her hands trembled as she said it, betraying the fear that lay beneath. The more I watched, the stranger it became. These permanent staff never spoke, never interacted, never rested. Their clothes never seemed to change, their movements always the same looping patterns. I began to wonder if they were staff at all, or something the mall had created, puppets dressed in familiar uniforms to mask its secrets. The worst came one evening as I walked through the service tunnels alone. I turned a corner and nearly collided with one of them. A tall man in a security uniform, his face pale, his eyes wide but lifeless. I muttered an apology and tried to step past, but he mirrored my movement precisely, blocking my way. His head tilted slightly, unervingly slow, as though studying me for the first time. I forced myself to squeeze by, my shoulder brushing his. His skin felt cold, not like flesh but like the chill of stone in shadow. When I glanced back, he was still there, watching, his mouth curling into the faintest trace of a smile that didn't belong to any human face I had ever known. That night, lying in bed, I realized a horrifying truth. The mall did not sleep, and neither did its chosen staff. They were part of the building, as permanent as the mannequins, as constant as the lights, bound to it in ways I did not yet understand. And if I stayed long enough, if I let myself sink too deeply into its rhythm, I feared I might join them, one more figure who never went home. By the 6th day, curiosity had become a sickness. The mall was peeling itself open one layer at a time, and though dread filled me with every discovery, I couldn't stop looking deeper. It was during a shift near the arcade that I stumbled upon something that should never have been there. The arcade was loud and disorienting, flashing with lights and digital screams. Yet beneath the manufactured joy was the same wrongness that infected every corner of the mall. The machines rattled with a metallic rhythm, their grins painted too wide, and the stuffed animals behind glass seemed to lean forward when no one was watching. But it wasn't the machines that drew me in. It was the wall at the far back, partly concealed by a broken claw crane covered with an out-of-order sign. Behind it, I noticed an uneven strip of wall, a seam too narrow to be part of the design. When I pushed the machine aside slightly, dust falling in clouds around me, I saw it more clearly. A door. No handle, no sign, only a rectangle cut into the surface, faintly darker than the rest. It was almost invisible, as though the mall itself wished it hidden. I pressed my palm against it and felt a vibration, steady and low, like a heartbeat pulsing through concrete. The air around the door was colder, carrying with it a sour smell of damp earth, completely out of place inside a shopping complex. I glanced over my shoulder, but no one paid attention. The workers and customers alike seemed oblivious, their laughter and chatter somehow failing to penetrate this corner. A sudden urge overcame me, stronger than fear, stronger than reason. I wanted to know what was behind it. I pressed harder, running my hand along the edges, and for a moment the surface gave slightly beneath my touch, like flesh instead of stone. My stomach lurched. Before I could push further, a voice startled me. A low, flat tone belonging to one of the permanent staff. A man in a faded polo shirt stood nearby, his expression blank, his gaze fixed not on me but on the hidden door. He didn't speak directly to me, didn't even seem to recognize me, yet his words slithered through the air. Not ready yet. The lights of the arcade flickered, games buzzing as if reacting to his voice. Then he turned and walked away, his steps silent, his head unnaturally still. I was left alone with the dark outline of the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't shake the memory of that vibration beneath my hand. It was not machinery. It was not pipes or wires. It was something alive, something waiting, something hidden in the belly of the mall where no customer was ever meant to step. That night, long after I left, I swore I could still feel it against my skin. The faint, pulsing rhythm, like a second heartbeat buried beneath my own. By the seventh day, the hidden door weighed heavily on my mind. Yet the mall had other plans for me. I was moved to a new section of work near the maintenance halls. Long stretches of concrete lined with humming machinery and thick metal vents. These vents carried the mall's breath, a constant rush of recycled air that should have been ordinary. But in the silence of those service corridors, I discovered the air carried more than a mechanical hum. Carried voices. At first, I thought it was a trick of fatigue. A faint murmur riding the air, words dissolving into static as they wound their way through the grills. I bent closer, pressing my ear to the cool metal, and the murmur sharpened into whispers. They were layered, dozens of voices speaking at once, all overlapping, all restless. Their tone was not frantic but patient, weaving in and out like threads of some larger design. I couldn't make out exact phrases, only fragments that chilled me. Still here. Not yet. Watching. Each syllable seemed to echo directly in my skull rather than through my ears. I pulled back, shaken. But the voices followed, curling out of the vents and sliding down the hallways like smoke. The other workers didn't react. They moved about their duties as though deaf, as though they couldn't hear the whispering at all. I tried to test them once, stopping near a vent where the sound was strongest, asking if they noticed anything unusual. A woman stocking supplies paused only briefly, her eyes flicking toward the grill with a sharpness that betrayed her calm face. Then she shook her head quickly, almost violently, before walking away faster than before. It wasn't that she didn't hear, it was that she refused to acknowledge it. That evening, the whispers grew bolder. As I walked alone through a narrow service tunnel, the vents above me groaned with a heavy rush of air, and beneath it the voices surged like a tide. They no longer murmured indistinctly. They called my name, clear, sharp, repeated in different tones, some childlike, some cracked with age, some eerily familiar, as though my own voice were among them. I staggered back, my chest tightening. The tunnel seemed to close in, the fluorescent lights buzzing harder until sparks flickered at their edges. The voices did not fade. They poured through the vents with insistent urgency, pressing against me until I clamped my hands over my ears. Yet even then, the sound burrowed through, vibrating in my skull. In desperation, I turned a corner and fled, but the whispers traveled ahead of me, spilling out from every vent, guiding me rather than chasing me. I realized, with horror, that they weren't simply speaking. They were leading me somewhere. Every hissed syllable urged me deeper into the tunnels, towards a place I had never seen. And though fear gripped me, my feet moved almost willingly, as if I had no choice but to follow. When I finally broke free into a more crowded corridor, the sound lessened, thinning into nothing more than the ordinary hum of air conditioning. But the silence brought no comfort. Because now I knew the truth, the vents didn't just carry air. They carried voices, fragments of those who had been swallowed by the mall, still trapped within its walls, still waiting, still whispering. And for reasons I could not understand, they had chosen me to hear them. By the 8th day, the mall's facade of normality was thin as paper. I could see through it now. The smiling customers, the flashing signs, the endless music that looped from hidden speakers. All of it was camouflage. Beneath it lay something vast and secret, a body hidden under fine clothes. The whispers in the vents had not left me. They lingered in the back of my mind, a constant murmur that seemed to guide my steps. It was their insistence that pulled me towards a discovery I should never have made. I had been asked to deliver stock to a service corridor I had not used before. The hallway was colder, narrower, with peeling paint that smelled faintly of damp. At the far end, past a door marked "Authorized Staff Only," I found a stairwell descending into darkness. At first, I thought it was a maintenance area, some boiler room or storage floor. But as I stepped inside, a sharp truth pressed into me. I had worked here for over a week, memorized the layout, studied the maps. The mall had no basement, yet the stairs went down. The walls were close and sweating with moisture, the air growing thicker the further I descended. The hum of the mall above faded until the silence pressed like a weight on my ears. The only sound was my own footsteps, soft against concrete that looked too worn, too ancient to belong to a building barely decades old. At the bottom, I found a corridor stretching endlessly, lined with doors that did not match any style from above. Heavy, iron-bound, some half-rotted, others rusted shut. The air smelt of mold, of dust and stagnant water, and beneath it all lingered a deeper stench, sour and animal, as though something long dead had seeped into the walls. I opened one door at random. Inside was a room filled with broken mannequins, their limbs scattered across the floor like bones. Their torsos were stacked in corners, their faces crushed and twisted, their empty sockets staring at me even in ruin. Another door revealed shelves of items I didn't recognize. Old toys, rusted prams, cracked mirrors, all coated in grime as if they had been here for decades, long before the mall was built. But the room that froze me was the third. It was not filled with objects but with chairs. Rows of them, bolted to the floor, each one facing the same blank wall. Straps hung from their arms, cracked leather stained dark. The air was heavier here, charged with a residue of suffering that made the skin on my arms prickle. I didn't need to imagine what the chairs had been used for. The silence screamed it. As I stumbled back into the corridor, I heard movement, soft, dragging steps from further down. Shadows shifted against the wall, too tall, too thin. I held my breath, forcing myself not to run, because instinct told me to run would be to invite pursuit. Instead, I backed slowly up the stairs, each creak of concrete louder than thunder in the suffocating dark. When I finally reached the top, the stairwell door closed itself behind me with a sound that echoed like a lock clicking shut. I leaned against the wall, trembling, my lungs aching for air. The basement should not exist, and yet it did, buried beneath the mall like a tumor, festering unseen. And whatever lived down there had known I was coming. By the 9th day, I no longer lived outside the mall. My flat became a blur, a place I returned to only long enough to collapse into restless sleep. The walls of the mall had claimed me, and each shift bled into the next until time itself lost meaning. What was 1 day or 30 when every hour carried the same heavy rhythm, the same oppressive breath pressing down on me? I began to feel as though I had been here all my life, a prisoner who only dreamed of a world beyond the automatic doors. The whispers in the vents grew quieter but more focused. They no longer spoke in broken fragments. Now they watched. I felt it in the way my skin prickled when I stood beneath a grill, in the way my own reflection in shop windows seemed to pause while I moved on. The mannequins no longer needed to shift positions to unnerve me. Their very presence was enough, their stillness heavier than movement. The permanent staff haunted me most. Their faces never changed, their eyes hollow yet fixed on something I could not see. When I crossed their paths, they no longer ignored me. They watched me, heads turning in perfect unison, as if responding to some silent command. I would find them standing in doorways, blocking corridors, waiting at the ends of escalators. Never speaking, never touching, only watching. By the 20th day, I stopped trying to explain what I was experiencing. No one would have believed me, and deep down, I wondered if the mall itself was stripping me of words, dulling my ability to describe its horrors. It didn't want me to speak. It wanted me to remain silent as those who watched me. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamt of the hidden door behind the arcade, of the heartbeat pulsing through its surface. I dreamt of the basement, of the chairs bolted to the floor, of shapes shifting in the dark just beyond the edge of sight. I woke each morning drenched in sweat, convinced I had not been sleeping at all but wandering those corridors in another state of being, the mall pulling me deeper into its own dream. By the 30th day, I had stopped counting the hours. My shifts no longer began or ended. They simply continued, stretching into one endless moment. My reflection no longer obeyed me. My shadow no longer moved in rhythm. I caught myself standing too still, too long, my arms heavy at my sides, my head tilted at an unnatural angle. And when I blinked, I saw the permanent staff reflected back, their frozen smiles becoming my own. I realized then that the mall had not merely been watching me. It had been teaching me. 30 days of silent watching, and I was becoming part of it. Absorbed into its endless corridors, another figure who would never go home. And the worst part was the acceptance blooming quietly in my chest. Because as much as I wanted to resist, a deeper part of me felt the pull, the belonging, as though I had always been meant to stand still among the mannequins and the staff who never left. The mall did not need to chase me. It only needed to wait. By the 30th night, my body moved as if it no longer belonged to me. My hands worked stock, adjusted displays, and carried crates without thought, like muscle memory shaped by someone else. I felt the whispers in the vents settle into silence, not because they had vanished, but because they no longer needed to speak. They had told me everything they wanted already. Now, the mall itself spoke through silence, through its walls and shadows, guiding me towards the inevitable. It was after closing when I decided to leave for good. My heart still clung to the faint idea of escape, the fragile hope that I could walk out the doors and never come back. I packed my bag quickly, ignoring the mannequins lining the atrium, ignoring the vacant faces of the permanent staff who seemed to drift closer as I moved. Their silence was suffocating, their eyes pulling at me like magnets, but I forced myself to walk with purpose. The exit loomed ahead, glass doors glinting faintly under the dimmed lights. For a moment, I almost believed I could make it, but as I approached, something was wrong. The reflection in the glass was not mine. The figure staring back was taller, thinner, its head tilted at that strange, unnatural angle I had seen too often among the permanent staff. Its smile was faint but unmistakable, lips stretched too wide, too knowing. I froze, dread crawling up my spine. I raised my hand slowly, and so did the reflection, but it moved half a beat late, like the footage I had once seen on the monitors. His eyes did not blink. The smile widened, and when I stepped closer, the reflection stepped forward as well, pressing its palm against the glass from the other side. The automatic doors should have opened. Instead, they sealed themselves shut, the metal frame vibrating as if welded by unseen hands. Behind me, I felt the air shift. I did not need to turn to know that the permanent staff had gathered, their silent ranks closing in, their cold presence filling the atrium like water flooding a chamber. My reflection began to mouth words I could not hear, its lips forming shapes I did not recognize. But I understood without sound. It was telling me the truth, that there was no leaving. The exit was never mine. It belonged to the mall, and so did I. The lights above flickered, plunging the hall into stuttering darkness. In those broken flashes, I saw myself reflected not once but a dozen times, each reflection frozen in different poses, as though fragments of me were already scattered across the mall's surfaces. My body trembled, but my mind grew quiet, numb, as if slipping into the same stillness that held the mannequins, the staff, the endless shadows. When the lights steadied again, the glass no longer showed my reflection. It showed nothing at all. And as the permanent staff reached me, their silent faces closing in, I felt the mall's heartbeat thrum beneath my skin. Steady, inevitable. The doors remained shut. The night remained endless. And I finally understood what it meant to work at the Mall of America. You never really leave.